She walked into the luxury car showroom wearing just a white t-shirt and jeans. She was black. Her hair tied back simply. Her eyes were kind. But that alone was enough for them to look down on her. The manager looked her up and down and sneered. "Cars here start at 3 billion rupiah. The used car lot is down the street." Other staff chuckled. Customers stared like she didn't belong there. She stayed silent. Not out of weakness, but because she'd been judged by her skin color too many times before. The next day, a Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up in front of the dealership. The door opened. A black man in a custom-tailored suit stepped out. Her husband. "I'm here to buy the car your staff refused to show my wife yesterday." The entire showroom fell silent. The manager's face turned pale. The woman they mocked turned out to be the founder of a multi-million foundation for disabled children. The punishment wasn't being fired. It was volunteering, pushing wheelchairs, serving, learning humility. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's episode will be even more intense. Chapter 1. White t-shirt, heavy eyes. The morning sun filtered gently through the towering windows of Chandler and Tate Automotive, a luxury dealership nestled in the wealthy edge of town. The showroom sparkled. Sleek Bentleys lined up like artwork, their flawless surfaces reflecting the marble floors. Behind the glass doors, customers arrived in designer heels and tailored suits, escorted with champagne and practiced smiles. And then she walked in. Maggie Collins didn't wear silk or heels. She wore faded jeans and a plain white t-shirt. Her black hair was pulled back into a simple, low puff, no makeup on her face. She didn't wear wealth like perfume. She didn't need to. But no one in the showroom knew that. From the moment her sneakers hit the floor, she felt it. The temperature of the room shifted, not literally, but in glances, in stares. One salesman paused mid-laugh. Another subtly leaned to whisper to a colleague. A blonde receptionist blinked and then smiled with tight lips, forced and brief. Maggie walked with calm purpose, her eyes scanning the floor models until they landed on a sleek midnight blue coupe raised slightly on a display platform. Her heart jumped. It was perfect. Not for her, but for someone far more important. She approached a desk where a young man with nervous energy and a name tag reading Daniel was arranging brochures. "Excuse me," she said, smiling gently. "I'd like to ask about that model over there." Before Daniel could answer, another man appeared. Sharp suit, slick hair, 2 white teeth. Blake Thompson, sales manager, the kind of man who judged net worth in a blink. And Maggie? She failed his test. "I'll take it from here, Daniel," Blake interrupted, without looking at the woman. He turned his $1,000 smile toward Maggie. "Looking for directions, ma'am?" Maggie blinked. "Number I was interested in the midnight blue coupe." Blake's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "That's the Azure edition," he said, as if correcting a child. "One of 15 made this year. It's not for casual viewing. Typically, our serious clients make private appointments." Maggie nodded, still composed. "I'd still like to know more about it." Blake's gaze swept down to her sneakers, lingered a beat, then returned to her face with condescension barely concealed. "Well, I suppose I can give you a brochure. Or," he added, gesturing vaguely toward the exit, "our used car division is just a few blocks east. Might be a better fit." Behind her, a quiet chuckle. She heard it. She heard all of it. The whisper, the glance, the stifled laugh, the judgment. Because she was black. Because she wasn't polished. Because she didn't look like she belonged there. Maggie's expression didn't change. She had experienced this before. Racism didn't always wear a white hood. Sometimes it wore Armani, but that didn't make it sting any less. She stepped back, brushing past Blake without another word. As the glass doors shut behind her, the manager smirked and turned back toward the floor. His time, he thought, was too valuable for dreamers. He had no idea. Chapter 2. The phantom that didn't knock the sun hadn't fully risen when a low, commanding hum rolled through the quiet street in front of Chandler and Tate Automotive. The staff hadn't even finished their morning coffee when heads turned, first slowly, then in disbelief. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, midnight gray, extended wheelbase, custom chrome trim, the kind of vehicle that didn't just arrive, it announced. The parking assistant scrambled to open the dealership's tall glass doors. From the back seat, the chauffeur, an older gentleman in crisp gloves, stepped out and walked around to open the rear door with practiced grace. Out stepped a man. He was tall, poised, and undeniably commanding. Skin the color of polished mahogany. A tailored charcoal suit hugged his frame with precise lines. His watch, understated but rare, peered out from beneath his sleeve like a quiet signal to those who knew real wealth when they saw it. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The name on the platinum card in his pocket carried weight far beyond the showroom floor. Alexander Collins. Inside, Blake Thompson had just wrapped up a morning pep talk. "Remember," he had told the sales team, "qualify your customers. Time is money. We serve a very specific clientele." He was adjusting his tie when he noticed the Phantom. "Oh my God," whispered one of the junior staff. "That's a Collins car." Blake straightened his suit jacket. "This is mine," he muttered. He made his way across the floor, fixing his posture, rehearsing his polished charm. "Good morning, sir," he called out as he stepped into the sunlight. "Welcome to Chandler and Tate. Blake Thompson, sales manager. It's an absolute honor." Alexander offered a firm handshake, but his expression remained unreadable. "Alexander Collins." "Of course, Mr. Collins." Blake's smile broadened. "What brings you in today? We just received a few limited editions I'd love to show you." Alexander's tone was flat, deliberate. "I'm here about the Azure Coupe. Midnight blue." Blake's face brightened even more. "An excellent choice. It's one of our—" "My wife was here yesterday," Alexander cut in, his gaze piercing. "She asked about it." There was a moment. Blake blinked. I don't recall meeting." "She was wearing jeans and a white t-shirt. You directed her to the used car lot." Silence. Dead. Echoing silence. The smile on Blake's face collapsed like glass under pressure. The color drained from his skin as he realized who she was and what he had done. Behind them, Daniel. Young, quiet, watching from a distance, visibly tensed. Blake opened his mouth, searching for a lie that didn't sound like one. "Mr. Collins, perhaps there was a misunderstanding." "No," Alexander said calmly. "There wasn't." Inside the showroom, staff began to murmur. Customers paused, and for the first time in his career, Blake Thompson had nothing to say, because the car they didn't let a black woman touch was about to be paid for in full by the man she called husband. Chapter 3. The Weight of Their Silence. Blake Thompson stood still, his breath catching somewhere between his throat and pride. The name Collins now echoed in his head like a siren he had ignored until it was too late. Around him, the once casual hum of luxury commerce had gone silent. Daniel, the youngest among the staff, held a clipboard in his hands, but his attention was fixed on Alexander. So was everyone else's. Alexander Collins stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his polished dress shoes clicking softly on the marble tiles. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to raise his voice. He was the voice in the room now. "I was planning to purchase that Azure Coupe," Alexander said, eyes never leaving Blake. "A birthday gift from my wife's sister. It was her idea, a celebration of survival after cancer." Blake looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "But," Alexander continued, "she never got past your judgment." Blake opened his mouth, but Alexander raised a hand. "I don't need an explanation. You already gave her one yesterday." He turned to glance at the car. The Azure sat proudly on its elevated platform, shining under precision lighting. Its beauty had been dulled now, stained by the smallness of the man who guarded it. "My wife," Alexander said, "has built a foundation that's raised over $50 million for children with disabilities. She's the kindest person I've ever met, and still yesterday you treated her like she was invisible. Worse, you treated her like she didn't belong." Someone in the room shifted. Another coughed, too loud, but no one spoke. "I'm curious," Alexander continued. "Was it her clothes, her skin, or just the fact that she walked in alone, unannounced, without a label you recognized?" "Mr. Collins," Blake tried, his voice shaking now. Alexander turned to him fully. "You don't get to speak for now." Richard Mason, the owner of the dealership, had arrived during the commotion. He stood a few feet away, his eyes darting between Blake and Alexander, trying to assess how much damage had just been done. "Mr. Collins," Richard began, approaching carefully, hands slightly raised. "Please accept my deepest apologies. I wasn't aware—" "You were there," Alexander interrupted sharply. "You heard her being dismissed." Richard faltered. I didn't realize she was your—" "That's the problem," Alexander said, calm but cold. "You didn't care who she was. Because in your world, people like her need to prove something before being treated like human beings." He let the words settle. Then finally, he looked at Daniel. "You were kind," he said simply. "You didn't know who she was. And you didn't need to." Daniel's eyes widened. "I just treated her like I would anyone else." "As it should be," Alexander replied. He turned back to Richard. "I'm not here to demand anything, but I am watching how you handle this." Then to Blake, who now looked smaller than ever in his perfectly fitted suit, Alexander delivered the final blow. "You don't just represent your dealership, you represent every door that's slammed shut in someone's face because of how they look. You think this is just about one car? It's not. It's about dignity. And yesterday, you failed." Alexander stepped away. "I'll let my wife decide if we still want the car," he added. Then he walked past the azure coupe without so much as glancing at it. And for the first time in his career, Blake Thompson understood what luxury really looked like. It wasn't parked on a platform. It walked out the door in jeans and a white t-shirt. Chapter 4. The lesson begins. Blake Thompson sat stiffly in the dealership lounge. His tailored suit now felt like armor made of paper. The weight of the morning's humiliation pressed on his chest like a brick he couldn't shake. The whispers had started before Alexander even left the building. "That's her husband? She's the founder of what? And Blake told her to check the used lot?" He heard them all. Each murmur sharpened the edges of his guilt. Richard Mason, the dealership owner, had ushered Alexander into his office shortly after the confrontation, stammering apologies and shallow reassurances. Blake had been told to stay put and not make things worse. He had never felt smaller. A few minutes later, Richard returned, flushed, tense, and silent. "Mr. Collins will be in touch," he muttered curtly, then stormed back into his office. For the rest of the day, Blake was a ghost in his own kingdom. Clients were assigned to other staff. His clipboard sat untouched. Daniel didn't even look at him, not out of spite, but out of quiet disappointment, and somehow that hurt more. The next morning, his inbox pinged with a message from Richard. Subject: "You're going." No argument. Attached was an invitation. The Collins Foundation Benefit Gala volunteers needed. Adaptive Sports Facility groundbreaking location, East Ridge Youth Center. Time, 7:30 a.m. Blake stared at the screen. A gala? No. He read closer. Not a black tie event, not a dinner, a volunteer shift. He was expected to show up early, assist children in wheelchairs, set up tents, carry boxes, serve food. It wasn't punishment, not officially, but Blake knew exactly what it was. Saturday morning came too fast. He arrived at East Ridge in casual slacks and a polo, his expensive watch left at home. A volunteer coordinator greeted him and handed him a lanyard that read simply, "Blake, Helper." The event was alive with color. Balloons, banners, children laughing, parents clapping, staff members in bright shirts guiding kids through obstacle courses and basketball drills adapted for wheelchairs, and in the middle of it all was her, Maggie Collins. No stage, no spotlight. She wore jeans and sneakers again, a clipboard in hand, and a walkie-talkie clipped to her belt. She was helping a young boy adjust his helmet before a wheelchair race. She hadn't seen him yet. Part of him wanted to slip away, avoid the moment, but instead he stepped forward. "Mrs. Collins?" She looked up. Her expression stayed neutral. Not cold, not cruel, just quiet. "Mr. Thompson," she said calmly, "thank you for coming. He cleared his throat. "I wanted to say thank you. For the opportunity." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, amused by the irony. "It's not an opportunity, Mr. Thompson. It's a mirror." Blake flinched inwardly. I didn't mean to offend you that day," he said carefully. "I know," Maggie replied. "That's the problem." She turned back to the boy and gave him a warm nod before watching him race off with a laugh. Then she looked at Blake again, her voice softer now. "You've probably worked hard to get where you are, and I'm sure you think you're fair to everyone. But you judged me before I even spoke a word." "I did," Blake admitted, eyes lowering. "This place," Maggie said, motioning around the field, "is full of people the world tries to dismiss. Kids who are told they'll never be athletes. Parents who've been laughed out of meetings. Volunteers who used to think like you." Blake's chest tightened. "But then they came here," she finished, "and saw what worth actually looks like." He nodded slowly. "I want to understand." "Then help," she said simply. "Not to save face, but to listen, to lift, to unlearn." And with that, she handed him a water bottle and pointed toward a group of kids gathered under a canopy. "Table 4 needs help setting up lunch." Blake took the bottle, nodded, and walked. Not because he was forced to, but because, for the first time in a long time, he wanted to earn the right to stay in the room. Chapter 5. The Boy in Chair. Number 7. Blake didn't know how to talk to children, especially not children in wheelchairs, or with tracheostomy tubes, or with prosthetic limbs. He had spent most of his adult life talking in rehearsed lines, closing million-dollar deals in showrooms polished to perfection. He was not built for these spaces. But now he was standing behind a folding table covered in paper napkins and sandwiches, fumbling with latex gloves that wouldn't stay on. "Yo," said a small voice to his left, "your gloves are inside out." Blake turned. A boy, no more than 10, sat in a sleek, lightweight wheelchair that looked custom fit for speed. He had a buzz cut, sharp eyes, and a lopsided grin. A pair of red and black sneakers poked out at the footplate. "Chair 7, the boy said, tapping his wheel. "That's me." Blake blinked. "Chair 7? "Yeah," the boy smirked. "They number the race chairs. I'm heat too. But don't worry, I'm fast. You giving out turkey or ham?" Blake found his voice. "Both." "Cool. I'll take 2 of each." Blake hesitated. I think it's 1 per person." The boy leaned in, mock whispering. "Then I'm 2 people. One's my stomach. The other's my appetite." Blake laughed before he could stop himself. He handed the boy 2 sandwiches. "Thanks, Mr. Blake. I'm Thomas. I coach people now, so don't screw up too bad out here, okay?" Thomas wheeled off before Blake could respond. The rest of the day passed in a blur of unexpected emotion. He served food, pushed a chair for a mother who needed a break, picked up water bottles, helped a boy who dropped his crutches. At some point, he forgot he was the guy who messed up. He wasn't a manager. He wasn't being watched. He was just helping. And then he found himself watching Maggie again. She moved through the field like a current of calm. Not directing, not commanding, but leading. A word here, a smile there. Parents gravitated to her like planets around a sun. Children lit up when she knelt beside them. There was nothing performative about her. She didn't need anyone to know she had money. Her power came from presence, from purpose, from knowing who she was. And Blake finally realized what he hadn't seen in the showroom that day. Not because it wasn't there, but because he hadn't looked deep enough. Maggie didn't walk in like someone trying to prove anything. She walked in like someone who had nothing to prove. As the sun dipped lower and the last of the tents came down, Maggie approached him. "You survived?" she said. "I did. Still think you're just here to volunteer?" Blake shook his head. "Number, I think I'm here to learn." Maggie studied him for a long moment. "We've had bankers here, lawyers, politicians. All of them leave with the same realization. The world they thought they understood is smaller than the one we live in every day." Blake nodded. "I've got a lot of unlearning to do." "You're not alone in that." Thomas rolled up between them. "Yo, Blake, you gonna be here next weekend too?" Blake looked at Maggie. She raised an eyebrow. "Well?" He looked down at Thomas and smiled. "Yeah, Coach, I'll be here." Chapter 6. No suits on Saturdays. The next Saturday came with no hesitation. Blake woke up before his alarm. There was no crisp suit waiting on the hanger, no polished shoes by the door. Instead, he pulled on a plain gray t-shirt, jeans, and the most comfortable sneakers he owned. It felt strange, strangely honest. He didn't drive his luxury sedan this time. He took the old Toyota his wife used for errands. It felt more appropriate. The field at East Ridge was already buzzing with energy when he arrived. Kids shouting, balloons bouncing in the breeze, volunteers setting up cones and tables. "Blake!" a voice rang out. "Thomas, chair 7. He zipped across the pavement like he had rockets attached to his wheels. "You're late," he said, even though Blake was 15 minutes early. "I was giving you a head start," Blake replied. "Nice." Thomas grinned. "Today I'm going to teach you how to shoot." "Shoot?" "Adaptive basketball. You'll suck at first. It's okay. I'm a great coach." Blake laughed. "Lead the way." The court was smaller than regulation size. The backboard had adjustable height. Most of the kids were in chairs, some permanent, some temporary due to surgeries or conditions. Maggie stood near the bench, clipboard in hand, calling out names for rotations. Blake joined the group under Thomas's command. The boy took his job seriously, even bringing out a whistle. "Rule 1, Thomas announced. You don't get to stand. Everyone plays in the chair." Blake sat down in one of the loaner chairs. It wobbled slightly. "Rule 2, no complaining. You miss a shot, you try again." He handed Blake a ball. Blake tried to dribble, but it bounced sideways. The kids giggled. "Coach, we got a rookie!" someone shouted. Thomas blew his whistle. "Quiet! Let him fail in peace!" Laughter again, but not cruel. Not like the snickers Blake remembered from the dealership. Here, failure was part of the process. And dignity? Dignity was everywhere. After an hour of play, Blake sat on the sidelines, sweating and breathless. Maggie walked over and handed him a bottle of water. "How's the new position?" she asked, her tone playful. "Exhausting," he said between gulps. "Humbling. Good." She sat beside him. "You're starting to see it then." He nodded. "I used to think people came to places like my dealership to feel important. Now I get it. We only think we're giving them something. But most of the time, they're just asking not to be judged." Maggie turned toward the court, where a girl with arm braces was attempting a free throw. The ball missed. Everyone clapped anyway. "That's what worth looks like," she said softly. "Effort, courage, joy." Blake stared at her, then out at the court. I don't know if I can fix what I did, he admitted. You can't, she said, but you can change what you do next. Later, while helping pack up equipment, Richard Mason called. Blake stepped away to take it. Blake, Richard said hurriedly, Mr. Collins just emailed. He asked about your involvement. Said you've been present at the last 2 events. I have. Well, good. Great. Because he's interested in revisiting the corporate fleet discussion. I think if you... Blake interrupted. I'm not doing this for a sale, Richard. Silence. I just wanted you to know, Blake added. Because if he does come back, it won't be because we sold him something. It'll be because we learned something. He hung up before Richard could respond. And for the first time in a long time, Blake Thompson felt like he had done something right, not as a salesman, but as a man. Chapter 7. Apologies in Plain Clothes. The invitation came in a plain envelope. It wasn't embossed or gilded like the ones Blake was used to seeing from car brands or exclusive clubs. The logo was simple, the Collins Foundation. The event, a night for ability, a formal benefit dinner to unveil plans for a new adaptive sports complex. Blake stared at it for a long time. It didn't come from Richard, not from Daniel. It came from Maggie, signed at the bottom in neat pen. Blake, come not as a guest, but as a witness. When he arrived that night, the ballroom shimmered, not in arrogance, but in purpose. Instead of gold-trimmed menus and lobster hors d'oeuvres, there were murals of children playing sports, walls covered in photographs of smiling kids in wheelchairs, and a display of prosthetic shoes and crutches that had been outgrown. Each table bore the name of a child, not a donor. He didn't recognize half the guests. There were nurses, volunteers, teachers, single moms, CEOs, black, white, brown. No one asking, what do you do? Everyone asking, how can I help? And near the stage, standing with quiet grace, was Maggie. She wore a dark blue dress, nothing flashy but elegant in the way only people who don't need to prove themselves can wear clothes. Alexander stood beside her, smiling as she spoke to a young girl who showed off her new leg braces. His hand rested on his wife's back with a gentle familiarity that said, "This woman moves worlds." Blake approached them slowly. Maggie turned to him, and for the first time, she smiled first. "Mr. Thompson." "Blake," he said gently. "Please." Alexander nodded politely. "Good to see you here." "I wasn't sure I belonged," Blake admitted, "but I wanted to say something, directly." Maggie tilted her head, listening. "I'm sorry, not just for what I said or didn't say, but for what I assumed, for what I represented in that moment. I thought I knew people. I didn't." There was no applause, no dramatic music, just stillness. "You looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong," Maggie said softly, "and yet here you are, fitting in just fine." Blake's voice cracked a little. "That's because you made space for me, even when I didn't deserve it." She paused. "People change," she said, "but only if they choose to." He nodded slowly. "Then I choose to." Thomas suddenly wheeled up beside them, wearing a tiny bow tie and a crooked grin. "Coach Blake," he said with pride, "I told them you'd show up." Blake chuckled. "Wouldn't miss it." Thomas leaned toward Maggie. "He still sucks at basketball, though." She laughed, an unguarded, real laugh. "We can work on that." Later that night, as Maggie took the stage to speak, Blake watched her not as someone who'd been corrected, but as someone who had learned. She told the audience that inclusion wasn't charity, that dignity wasn't something you hand out, that the world didn't need more polished suits. It needed more people willing to listen. And somewhere deep in the crowd, one former luxury sales manager clapped harder than anyone else. Because now, finally, he understood why that woman in jeans and a white t-shirt had walked out without looking back. She wasn't running from shame. She was walking in grace. Chapter 8. A Seat at the Table. 2 weeks after the gala, Blake received another unexpected call, not from Richard Mason, not from a vendor, but from Daniel. "Hey, Blake," the younger salesman said, voice hesitant. "I, heard about the gala. Maggie mentioned you helped set up. That's cool." Blake smiled quietly into the phone. "Yeah, it was more than that. It changed something in me." Daniel paused. "So, are you still with the dealership?" Blake let the question hang in the air. "Yes, but not the same way I was. Because they asked me to mentor the new hires, and I asked them to let you help, if that's okay." Blake sat back in his chair, surprised. "You want me to help train them?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "Not how to close deals, how not to make the mistake you did with Maggie." It wasn't an insult. It was an invitation. 3 days later, Blake stood in front of a small group of new sales recruits at Chandler and Tate. He wore no tie, no pocket square, just a soft gray shirt and a clean pair of slacks. "I used to think success came from control," he told them, "from how you looked, how you sounded, how fast you closed." He looked around at the group, diverse, attentive. "But the truth is, the most powerful thing you can do in this job is see people." He clicked the remote and the screen behind him lit up with a picture, a candid photo of Maggie helping a child balance during physical therapy. No makeup, no spotlights, just grace. "She walked into this showroom wearing jeans and a t-shirt," Blake said, "and I failed her." Silence. "But what she taught me was priceless. That a person's worth has nothing to do with appearance, income, or labels." He looked up again, voice steadier now. "You're not here to sell cars. You're here to sell dignity, because one day someone like her will walk through those doors, and you'll decide whether they leave empowered or diminished." Daniel, standing in the back, gave a quiet nod. That evening, Blake got another message from Alexander Collins, subject, "Re-fleet proposal." "Maggie told me about your session with the new hires. She said she saw something different in your eyes. Let's talk about that corporate fleet again. You'll handle it." Blake exhaled slowly, not in relief, in responsibility. He knew this time he wouldn't handle the sale the same way, because now the cars weren't the most valuable thing in the room. The people were. Chapter 9. What Respect Looks Like. The next few weeks passed quietly, but with purpose. Blake spent his mornings mentoring, his afternoons volunteering at the foundation, and his evenings reading about accessibility, unconscious bias, and organizational empathy. He was learning to listen, not just to voices, but to silences, the pauses, the unspoken. He'd stopped chasing prestige. Now he was chasing understanding. And then came the day he returned to the place where it all started, not as a salesman, but as a human being. It was a sunny Tuesday when Maggie walked into the dealership again, but this time the atmosphere was different. No glances, no whispers, no snickers, just silence. And then awareness. She wore a deep maroon blouse and dark jeans. Her hair was tied in a braided bun, her posture calm but powerful. She moved like someone who didn't need permission to exist in a space. Blake saw her first. He walked over, not rushing, not overcompensating, just steady. "Maggie," he greeted with a genuine smile. "Blake," she nodded. "You ready for this?" He was. Together, they stepped into the conference room where the dealership's leadership team had gathered. Charts, contracts, and proposals were neatly prepared. But the real reason Maggie was there wasn't business. It was clarity. She stood before them and said, "I'm not here to discuss just the Azure Coupe. I'm here to discuss how you see people." You could hear a pen drop. "When I walked into this place the first time, I was judged, laughed at, dismissed." She looked at each manager, not with malice, but with the calm weight of truth. What if I had been a single mother on her last leg, walking in for a used car she'd saved 5 years for? What if I was a veteran? A teacher? Someone you assumed didn't belong? No one moved. I don't need your apology, she added. What I need is your change. Then she handed Blake the folder. He stepped forward. In collaboration with the Collins Foundation, he announced, we're offering dealership-wide training on inclusion and unconscious bias. Mandatory. Paid. Ongoing. The senior managers shifted uncomfortably. Alexander Collins stepped into the room, unnoticed until that moment. In fact, he said smoothly, those who don't wish to participate will be free to seek opportunities elsewhere. The statement landed with finality. Because this wasn't a suggestion. This was a shift. Afterward, Maggie walked the showroom alone. She paused in front of the Azure coupe, the same one from months ago. This time, no one approached her. No one hovered or redirected. She belonged, and not because they recognized her face or her husband's name. She belonged because she never stopped belonging. They had just needed time to catch up. Blake watched from a distance. He didn't approach. He didn't sell. He simply observed the very woman who had unmade him and remade him. Not with anger, but with grace. And that, he now understood, was what respect looked like. Chapter 10. What You Leave Behind. The grand opening of the new Collins Adaptive Sports Complex was more than just a ribbon cutting. It was a celebration of voices that had once been ignored, a place built not to fix what was broken, but to amplify what had always been strong. On the walls hung murals painted by the children themselves. In the gym, kids raced in custom chairs. In the stands, donors, neighbors, and families stood side by side, not segregated by status, but united by story. And in the crowd stood Blake Thompson, wearing no name tag, no title, just a smile. Next to him, Thomas, chair 7, spun small circles, grinning wide. "You nervous?" Thomas asked. "Why would I be nervous?" Blake said. "Because they're calling your name next." Blake blinked. "What?" Too late. The MC's voice rang out. "We'd like to thank one of our newest partners, someone who's taken big steps toward building a better, more inclusive community. Blake Thompson?" Cheers followed. Not thunderous, but warm, earnest. Blake stepped forward, hands slightly trembling. He didn't speak long, just a few words that had taken a lifetime to learn. "Once I believed value came from what people wore, drove, or owned. Now I know it comes from how we treat people when no one's watching. And I'm grateful to this community for teaching me what my education never did." Applause. Then stillness. And in the front row, Maggie clapped with the same quiet dignity she had the day she walked into his dealership and changed everything, without raising her voice. Later that evening, after the crowd had dispersed and the sun had begun to set, Blake stood outside the center, watching a group of children chase the last light of day. He felt a presence beside him, Alexander Collins, the man who had once turned a showroom into a courtroom. "Mr. Collins," Blake said respectfully. Alexander nodded once. "You've done the work." Blake shrugged. "I'm still doing it." Alexander smiled. "Good answer." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Alexander added, "I wasn't just angry that day, you know." "I'd be surprised if you weren't." "I wasn't angry just because you dismissed my wife. I was angry because I used to be you." Blake turned, startled. Alexander continued, "I judged, measured, labeled, before success taught me that none of it mattered. And Maggie, she saved me from that, just like she saved you." Blake nodded slowly. She never needed to raise her voice. "No," Alexander agreed, "because her life is the message." As Blake walked to his car that night, he passed the front sign of the center. Etched underneath the Collins Foundation logo was a single sentence. "See the worth before the wealth." Blake paused, one hand in his pocket, the other brushing across the words. He didn't need his old life anymore, because this was the legacy he wanted. Not the cars, not the commission, but the kind of change you can't measure in dollars, only in dignity.